The Subcommittee on the Indo-Pacific of the House Foreign Affairs Committee will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to inquire how the fiscal year 25 East Asia Pacific budget request is contributing to combating China in the Indo-Pacific. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. As stated, welcome to the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee's hearing entitled Properly Resourcing the Indo-Pacific in an Era of Great Competition. The Indo-Pacific region's economic, geographical, and military significance makes it an essential arena for U.S.-China competition. Xi Jinping is growing bolder and more brazen by the day. The PLA is using axes, knives, and water cannons in the South China Sea, flying fighter jets and sailing naval vessels around Taiwan and bringing or bribing officials to influence Pacific Island nations. We are at a crossroads in the US-CCP great power competition. China's economy is slowing down, and the world is waking up to CCP's illegal and exploitative tactics and to its massive trade with Russia that has reconstituted its military. During this time, we must choose to show up for our allies or risk ceding our leadership to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. With this objective in mind, we cannot ignore the very real budget restraints, which means we need to focus on the priorities that matter the most. The Indo-Pacific is the priority theater, according to our Defense Department, and the State Department has established a China House to focus attention. Despite this, the East Asian and Pacific Affairs Bureau, EAP, is historically one of the most underfunded bureaus at the state. The CCP's influence is strongest in the Indo-Pacific, and I want to ensure that amidst EAP cuts and increases to the Countering People's Republic of China Influence Fund, or CPIF, that funds are prioritized for areas where malign CCP activity is most prominent. In April, we passed the Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental that provided even with a remote nexus to China. Our continued presence and programming in the region are crucial for our allies and partners and essential to preserving a free and open Indo-Pacific. This is especially so with the Pacific Islands, and we have made important steps in the right direction, such as opening embassies in the Solomon Islands and in Tonga, but we must continue meaningfully expanding our presence. This past May, I was in the region to meet with Taiwanese President Lai and other high-ranking officials and to attend Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. The message is clear each time I visit the Indo-Pacific. Our allies are awaiting for us to show up, and we must demonstrate that we are here and here to stay. When we don't show up, our adversaries do. China is funding critical infrastructure projects and signing security pacts across the region. The U.S. remains the economic and security partner of choice, but without greater U.S. support, the region could be forced to accept further trade and investment from the CCP. The Indo-Pacific will choose us if they have the choice, but we must give our friends the choice. Given that the CCP's aggressive actions in the South China Sea and around Taiwan might plunge the region into a crisis, we need to stop making promise or empty promises and deliver. The purpose of this hearing is to discuss the best path forward for the United States to counter the CCP in the Indo-Pacific region in the context of U.S. financial constraints and budget cuts. So I want to thank both of our witnesses for appearing before our subcommittee to testify today, and I look forward to our detailed and robust discussion about the U.S. government efforts in this regard. Let's see. Now, the chair recognizes Ranking Member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Berra, for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here and certainly discussing the Biden-Harris administration's proposed budget for East Asia and the Pacific. As I said when Secretary Blinken testified before the full committee, as I look back at the administration, I think they've laid a strong foundation for the Indo-Pacific region. Certainly reviving the trilateral between Korea, the United States, Japan. That is in a great place, and everything that's come out of that. Raising the Quad coalition to the leaders level, United States, Japan, Australia, India. Again, that I think is a fundamental. The AUKUS deal also in terms of maritime security, freedom of navigation, and I could go on, including the recent trilateral between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines, also incredibly critical. So, as I told the Secretary, from that perspective, foundationally, I give the administration high grades on that. I also, as I look at this budget, I think there are really important investments that are made in this budget. Over the last 2 months, I've been spending a lot of time traveling the Pacific Islands, so have had the chance to visit Fiji, Tonga, Tuvalu, and more recently the Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea. And they're not easy places to get to, but it is important for us to be there. And what, as the chairwoman mentioned, what you see on all of these visits is the presence of the PRC and what they're doing. Often not necessarily to the benefit of folks. It's great to have a beautiful stadium in the Solomon Islands that sits empty. Doesn't really benefit the folks. Instead, what they're really asking for is healthcare and education, leadership training for their young people, and those are all things that we do very well. I'm heartened that we, being out on the Solomons, that we will increase our diplomatic presence there. Having an embassy, certainly being out in Tonga and visiting the embassy out there. I think these are all really important things that are great. I understand, Vanuatu, getting our embassy there is imminent as well. So I think that's incredibly important. When I look at the budget, there are a few things that I want to pull out and make sure as we go through the process. The proposed workforce expansion of nearly 550 positions at state and USAID. That's incredibly important because, in a bipartisan way, I think we recognize the investments that Beijing is making in the region and personnel. And if we want to compete, we have to be able to make those same investments in our diplomatic corps, in our development personnel. Again, incredibly important. I see the importance of expanding programs like the Waisili program, the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative. Doesn't cost us a lot, but what it does do is it builds capacity, builds strengths, and really reaps the benefits. Programs like the Peace Corps, these are all soft power programs, but incredibly important. So again, as I look at the budget, I really do applaud some of the investments. And as we go through the budgeting process and the appropriations process, in my mind, I'd actually like to give you more diplomatic presence and give you more personnel, because again, in the heyday of American diplomacy and development, the three-legged stool of foreign policy was much better balanced. And even if you talk to our folks at the Pentagon and the DoD, the adequate resourcing of our diplomatic corps and our development agencies cannot be understated. So I look forward to hearing the testimony. Certainly appreciate this, and again, appreciate the work that our men and women at USAID, at the State Department, and elsewhere do every day, because they really are the front line in the face of the United States of America abroad. So thank you for everything that you do. Be well. And I yield back.
Thank you. And other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. Honorable Daniel Kritenbrink is the Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Michael Schiffer is the Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Asia at the United States Agency for International Development. Thank you both for being here. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I will ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for members to ask questions. And let me now recognize Secretary Kritenbrink for your 5 minutes of opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Bera, members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify regarding the President's FY25 budget request for East Asia and the Pacific. And I'm delighted today to be joined by my friend and colleague, USAID Assistant Administrator Michael Schiffer. The Indo-Pacific, of course, as you noted, Madam Chairwoman, is the focal point for many of our most pressing geopolitical and economic priorities. With over half the world's population and 2/3 of the world's economy, the region is the center of global economic growth in the 21st century. As our national security strategy states, it is in our vital national interest that we ensure that developments in the region are consistent with our interests and values. With billions of dollars in investment and millions of American jobs supported by the region, the security and prosperity of everyday Americans relies on an Indo-Pacific that is free and open, connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. Since the release of the administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, the United States has taken historic strides to advance our shared affirmative vision for the region. Our accomplishments under the Indo-Pacific strategy reflect not only U.S. leadership, but also an unprecedented level of cooperation with our allies, partners, and friends to tackle global challenges and protect our shared vision for the world. Our work together to build collective capacity remains the bedrock of our approach to the region. To advance this vision, we are working with allies and partners whose shared commitment to democracy, human rights, and governance acts as a beacon of strength. For example, the United States has long supported the people of Burma, and we will continue to support all those working peacefully to restore Burma's path to democracy. We also continue to work with the international community to raise awareness of DPRK human rights issues. Key efforts led by the Department of State in collaboration with our partners and allies have advanced each of the 5 objectives of our Indo-Pacific strategy. For example, we successfully renegotiated the Compacts of Free Association, which the Congress thankfully passed into law back in March. We've supported our Philippine allies in upholding international law in the South China Sea. We've expanded our physical presence in the Indo-Pacific by opening embassies in the Solomon Islands, Tonga, and the Maldives. Together with our G7 partners, we launched the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment. We've signed defense cooperation agreements with Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. We established a mechanism for real-time information sharing on DPRK missile threats with Japan and the Republic of Korea. While this focus on the Indo-Pacific is driven by how vital the region is to our own security and prosperity, we also acknowledge the growing challenge posed by the People's Republic of China. The PRC is the only state with the intent to reshape the international order, and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, informational, and technological means to do so. Building on our efforts to advance the Indo-Pacific strategy, the President's FY25 budget request includes $4 billion in discretionary funding, of which $1.9 billion would support the EAP region. That includes $511 million for diplomatic engagement and a foreign assistance budget of $1.4 billion. The President's budget also includes $2 billion in mandatory funding to support game-changing investments in the Indo-Pacific to counter the PRC, and $2 billion in mandatory funding to create a new international infrastructure fund. This is a substantial increase in funding designed to deliver on our shared priorities in the region. Diplomatic engagement resources will expand the U.S. footprint in the region, increasing personnel that directly support the implementation of the Indo-Pacific strategy, particularly at our newly opened and expanded embassies in the Pacific. Foreign assistance resources will support each of the strategy's objectives and strengthen key regional frameworks. Our request also supports our commitment to maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The U.S. One China policy, which has remained consistent over the past 45 years, has been key to the maintenance of peace and stability. A new base FMF request of $100 million specifically for Taiwan will support our effort to assist Taiwan in maintaining a sufficient self-defense capability, in addition to funding passed in the recent Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental Appropriations Act. The United States must continue to expand its presence and investment in the Indo-Pacific to achieve our strategic goals. Our allies and partners are looking to us to provide credible alternatives to the PRC. The President's FY25 budget request will allow us to build on our existing efforts and will further strengthen our commitment to this vitally important region. Thank you again for inviting me to testify today. I'll look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Kritenbrink. And now I recognize Mr. Schiffer for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Bera, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify on USAID's role in advancing U.S. foreign policy priorities in East Asia and the Pacific. The East Asia and the Pacific region is home to over 2 billion people, the world's fastest growing economies and busiest maritime trade routes, and to rapidly urbanizing and increasingly connected societies. It is also where the pacing challenge of our Euro great power strategic competition, the PRC, and that very much includes for sustainable development, is felt most acutely. I have been privileged to lead USAID's development and humanitarian efforts in this region for the past 2 years. A recurring theme in our discussions and travel throughout the region, including in the Mekong sub-region and in the Pacific, is the importance of showing up and following through on America's commitments. I've also seen firsthand how essential these countries are as U.S. partners in creating a free and open Indo-Pacific that underwrites regional stability and helps generate prosperity here at home. For our part, the United States offers our partners mutually beneficial and transparent collaboration. We are wholly focused on advancing an affirmative vision for open, transparent, and rules-based societies in the countries where we work. USAID harnesses American ideals, empowering nations to achieve their ambitions and supporting them to build resilience to maintain their achievements. As one of the 3 essential lines of effort in U.S. foreign policy, diplomacy, development, and defense, USAID forges relationships through development that helps the region address the climate crisis, food insecurity, threats to democracy, global health security, and the need to increase the adoption of open and secure digital technologies. Critically, our work also combats coercive practices, both by advancing shared values and interests with our partner countries and by driving lasting progress beyond programs that aligns with local priorities. USAID works in lockstep with Congress to achieve these ambitious objectives. As Administrator Power noted in her testimony on this budget request, we recognize the need for trade-offs, and we appreciate your support as we look to deliver even better value for money. The President's FY25 request for USAID is $853.6 million for East Asia and the Pacific, a $41.7 million increase over the FY23 enacted amounts. Through critical targeted investments in strategic sectors, the FY25 request focuses on a key set of efforts. First, through our affirmative approach to development, we will strengthen good governance and improve basic service delivery, including health and education. We seek to reduce corruption and to mitigate information manipulation while strengthening the pillars of civil society that are critical for democracy, peace, and stability. Second, our demand-driven climate change activities seek to reduce emissions, protect critical ecosystems and biodiversity, implement regulatory reforms, mitigate resource conflicts, and help our partners with their energy transitions. Third, to boost connectivity and facilitate flows of goods, services, people, and knowledge, USAID seeks to expand the region's network for trade, in information and communications technology, and in energy and transportation sectors. And fourth, to bolster economic empowerment, gender equity, and human rights, USAID works to increase women's political, civic, and economic engagement, address gender inequality, and combat gender-based violence. Across all these goals, USAID seeks to advance democratic development and as an essential enabler for sustainable growth and prosperity, lifting up everyone. Delivering on development outcomes with our partners is how we demonstrate the strength of our model and the enduring value of partnership with the United States. Bipartisan support for USAID's effort makes America safer and more prosperous. Your support provides a critical foundation for continued U.S. leadership and influence in a world where others are working aggressively to erode international institutions, laws, and norms of behavior, to undermine U.S. alliances, and to diminish basic human rights and freedoms. With your continued support and on behalf of the American people, USAID will deliver on our commitments and continue our central role in strengthening U.S. security and prosperity across the Indo-Pacific. I look forward to your counsel and to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you both for your wonderful opening testimonies. I think the common theme here today is obviously our friends, allies, and partners in the Indo-Pacific region are really asking for us to show up. And as we appreciate the relationship that we have with our friends, it's really important that we talk about that. So I want to start with my first line of questioning to you, Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink.
Yes, ma'am.
And talk about the Taiwan Travel Act of 2018, which we signed into law. And that allowed high-level officials from Taiwan to visit United States. So could you talk to us if there is any State Department restriction that would prevent a current sitting Taiwanese President Lai, Vice President, and any other high-level officials from traveling to the United States, not just as a stopover, which we've seen over the years every year. So could you talk to that issue?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you very much. First of all, just to underscore the fact that America continues to make very clear through our words and our actions that the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait is a fundamental American national interest.
Can you just speak directly to whether or not we are allowing that?
Just to put it in the right context, I think the U.S.-Taiwan partnership is stronger than it's ever been. I think we have regular diplomatic channels.
That's why. Can you talk specifically to if Department
we
of State
support travel
do you have any
and
restriction
engagement
on allowing them based on this bill?
based
that's
on
signed into law?
long-standing precedent. We have a range of channels that we use. Some of that involves meeting face-to-face, sometimes through other channels. We have facilitated, as you are well aware, transits of the United States by
Right. We are all
senior
aware of that. I
leaders.
mentioned that numerous times. So is there any restriction why the Taiwan president and vice president has not come to Washington?
So
Washington,
traditionally, based on our robust, important, but unofficial partnership with Taiwan, we don't have those leader-to-leader meetings that would imply
But the
sovereignty.
Taiwan
But we
Travel
have
Act that's
facilitated.
signed into law allows them to be able to do it. So I'm just asking specifically if this is a restriction that the State Department has put on. So hopefully you can change that, because now it is up to the State Department to make it happen, because it is a law.
I'm happy to look at that further, ma'am.
Yeah, but then let's go to the next question. On the similar level, the Taiwan Travel Act also allows high-level U.S. officials to travel to Taiwan. So on that note, I want to ask you if you have personally visited Taiwan in your current position.
I have not visited Taiwan in my current position, but I have traveled to Taiwan twice previously.
Previously, could you tell us the dates that you have done?
My recollection is I traveled to Taiwan in 2009 and 2013.
And again, that's I know it's before your time, but again, the Taiwan Travel Act is already signed into law, and that allows us, the high-level officials like you, to travel to Taiwan. So I hope you have plans to go to Taiwan, hopefully soon.
I don't currently have plans to travel to Taiwan, but what I would underscore, Madam Chairwoman, is that there is frequent travel and interaction going both ways between the United States and Taiwan, and there's communication and other channels as well.
I encourage you to consider doing that soon.
Okay.
The CPIF established to fund initiatives and projects to counter CCP's malign influence, but many projects appear to neglect China and make the CPF look more like a slush fund. So can you provide two of the best examples of how CPF funds counter the CPP malign influence?
Yes, ma'am. First, I would say we're very grateful for Congress's support of the CPIF. We think it's a vitally important fund. I'll give you a couple of examples, maybe not all of the details in this open session, but I think two of the most impactful projects that I can think of. One is related to undersea cables, and explicitly through CPIF monies, we were able to help facilitate partners using reliable dependable vendors and sources for undersea cables rather than alternatives. And secondly, CPIP monies have also been very important seed monies in some of our most important infrastructure and corridor
Could you
investments.
quickly tell
in the
me what
Indo-Pacific.
regions of the world and what functional issue is most threatened by the CCP's malign influence?
I'm sorry, Madam Chairwoman, can you repeat
What
one more
region
time?
of the world and what functional issue is
Yeah.
most threatened by the CCP's malign influence?
Well, ma'am, what I would say is China poses a global challenge, but that challenge is most intense in the Indo-Pacific. Difficult for me to point to just one challenge, but in general, I would probably surmise it by saying the biggest challenge that we face is making sure that countries have options and choices so they can make their own decisions free from coercion, and so they're not dependent on China or China-related, or not exclusively dependent on China or China-related supply chains, which would open them
Thank
to
you. We'll
coercion.
continue our conversation. My time's up. So let me
ma'am.
now recognize Ranking Member Berra for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This week we're going to vote on a foreign operations appropriation bill that is a 12% budget cut. And I guess let me ask you, when you think about a 12% budget cut at a time when we're losing the influence battle, we're losing the development battle, I guess to either one of you, or Secretary Kritenbrink, is China cutting its budget or is it increasing its diplomatic presence in the Indo-Pacific?
I think it's very clear they're increasing their presence and engagement everywhere.
And Mr. Schiffer, is China decreasing their development Belt and Road Initiative, or are they increasing their funding?
We see them increasing their efforts and learning every day. It's deeply concerning.
So this would be an absolute boneheaded move to cut the foreign assistance, foreign aid budget by 12%. That would be devastating to our abilities in those regions. Mr. Schiffer, let me talk to you a little bit about aid and development. We obviously, I mentioned in my opening statement, traveling to the Solomon Islands. When I talk to the folks there, the elected officials in the Solomons and the PNG, it actually is pretty clear the public, the citizens in these places really want the U.S. presence there. They want those options. Could you give us some examples of how we're working with our like-minded, like-valued allies on the aid and development to give them other options in the Pacific Islands, whether that's working with Australia or Japan? I know coming out of the recent trilaterals, for a place like Tuvalu, we're working with the Japanese to connect that island with cables and so forth. But just some examples and ways we could work with our partners.
Sure, no, thank you. Very, very much appreciate that question. And we have put a lot of thought and effort over the past several years into strengthening our development partnerships, just as our colleagues at the Department of State have looked to strengthen partnerships on the diplomatic side. As Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink offered earlier, we worked with Japan and Australia to provide support for 2 cables to Palau and to the East Micronesia cable, which we believe will allow there to be safe, secure, and reliable internet and digital connectivity across the Pacific, and at a time when we see increasingly contested information space with the PRC and mismal and disinformation efforts. We think that is increasingly important. USAID and TECRO, Taiwan, signed an MOU in November of 2022, and we have since moved out through the Pacific American Fund to support more than $5 million in local livelihood and resilience initiatives targeted at local fishing communities, women-owned enterprises and the like in the Pacific, which serves a development goal but also helps us to strengthen Taiwan's posture in the region. As you know, last year we had the first ever strategic U.S.-Japan-Korea development dialogue. Just a couple of weeks ago at the Department of State, we had a U.S.-Japan development and diplomacy dialogue where we've talked about a range of education, healthcare, information technology, and infrastructure projects where we are all looking, and with our Australian friends as well, to be able to coordinate our efforts better, given the scope, scale, and urgency of the challenge that we face.
Right, and recently in my travels around the Pacific Islands, I was made aware of a project in RMI, the Marshall Islands, that was Pacific Island tuna. The Nature Conservancy working with the Marshall Islands, because I constantly hear the importance of addressing illegal fishing, but also increasing the value chain here. And Mr. Schiffer, I imagine that USAID is aware of that project, working with Walmart to look at sustainable fishing, add value, and so forth. And that's one that we've been talking to others about, thinking about how could we replicate that in other places. And
Thank you very much for asking that. We are really proud of the work that we've done with our colleagues at the Development Finance Corporation, with the Nature Conservancy, and with Walmart to create that public-private partnership to be able to work with RMI on that tuna dock, which we think will be really critical to drive economic growth, help with sustainable tuna fisheries, and create additional opportunities for private sector advancement. We share your ambition to be able to scale that elsewhere. We've been talking, in fact, just this past week with our colleagues at the Department of State and the Department of Commerce and at the White House about how we might take the positive example we have in RMI and move that forward and expand it elsewhere.
look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you. I now recognize Rep. Barr for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Kritenbrink, my bill, the Countering PRC Malign Influence Fund Authorization Act of 2023, passed the House last year. That bill reasserts this committee's oversight of the State Department by placing an authorization on an already appropriated account, again, the Malign Influence Fund. While appropriated, though, there's little to no guidance on what constitutes PRC malign influence. As a result, we've seen this fund being spent in wasteful ways, not in line with the intended purpose. For example, $6 million for expanding Pacific Island weather and ocean data collection, $5 million for English language training in Angola, $2.5 million for scooter charging stations in Vietnam. Since the fund was established, has the CCP's malign influence increased or decreased?
Well, Representative Barr, no doubt increased.
And so will you agree that these funds should be primarily focused on the Indo-Pacific and not on frivolous things outside of the PRC?
Representative Barr, I can assure you that we are focused specifically on countering Chinese influence with those funds. China is a global challenge, of course. That's why the monies are spent globally. I do believe we recognize that the competition is most intense in the Indo-Pacific, but I would say respectfully, sir, those funds are not spent frivolously, and we believe they're evaluated solely through the lens.
Well, I agree with you. It's important. That's why we put an authorization on it.
Yes, sir.
Just kind of monitor where those funds are going.
Yes, sir.
We'll work with you on that.
And, of course, work with Michael and his colleagues, too.
It is important. Follow-up question for you. And a question for the record, I asked if you or anyone at State encouraged another agency to delay implementation of a sanction or export control. I asked you this question in the Select Committee. Your written response was, we do not disclose the details of internal deliberations and discussions between officials. This really seems like an easy thing to say yes or no to. So I'll ask the question again. Have you or anyone at State encouraged another agency, specifically Treasury or Commerce, to delay the implementation of a sanction or export control with respect to the PRC?
I think first of all, as a matter of principle, we don't disclose our internal debates. But what I would say, Representative Barr, what I hope that you and the public would focus on would be the unprecedented number of steps that we've taken as administration. 300 actions under Commerce entity listings, 400 SDN Treasury listings, more than 100 listings to counter the ongoing genocide in Xinjiang. So we do talk about what's the most effective way to advance our interests in terms of scope and timing. I hope that would be obvious. But
I applaud you when you do the right thing and you do list entities that need to be on the entity list. The question, though, I'm asking is, have you delayed or have you delisted? Have you taken sanctions off of or delayed sanctions on the PRC? And your reluctance to answer that simple question leads us to infer that the State Department has, in fact, asked Treasury to delay implementation of sanctions or not list or ask Commerce to delay implementation of an export control. And here's why that's troubling, because after the APEC summit, we know that the administration removed sanctions from the Chinese Institute, the Ministry of Public Security's Institute of Forensic Science, as in a push for help on fentanyl. The investigation in the Select Committee on China has concluded that China has not reciprocated at all, and in fact has stepped up their subsidies of the manufacture and export of illicit fentanyl materials. So that's what we're concerned about, is chasing diplomacy, delivering sanctions relief to our adversary, and getting nothing in return.
Congressman, respectfully, we see things very differently. We don't pull our punches. We believe that our diplomacy doesn't hinder our competitive actions; it enables them.
I know we have a disagreement.
And sir, I would just say, if you look at the numbers that I outlined, literally we're talking more than 700 competitive actions against China. This is an unprecedented level. And also, I would say, if you look at those actions, they're carried out right before our diplomatic interactions, during and after. So respectfully, there's no correlation between diplomacy and relief. And we actually don't see the steps we've taken as providing relief.
Final question. As co-chair of the Taiwan caucus, it's a priority that Taiwan be delivered the arms that they need.
Yes, sir, we agree.
But in 2022, the administration rejected or discouraged Taiwan from acquiring early warning aircraft and anti-submarine warfare helicopters and considering canceling other programs. If strategic ambiguity is the policy, as we've discussed before, why is this administration preventing Taiwan from modernizing its force to counter a Chinese invasion?
Respectfully, we're doing just the opposite. We've notified more than 20, I believe it's 22 foreign military sales to Taiwan just in the last 2.5 years, more than $6 billion. And our whole goal, Representative Barr, is to build Taiwan's credible deterrent capability, particularly in asymmetric means.
We can follow up on that,
yes, sir.
Madam Chair.
If there's time, I want to let the members know now I recognize Representative Sherman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our focus here is on the Indo-Pacific, but we have only one witness from the State Department dealing with East Asia and the Pacific, and I hope that we get Assistant Secretary Liu here, who can perhaps tell us that someday we'll see the freedom of Dr. Afridi, the man who has done more for the American people than any other non-U.S. citizen in perhaps 200 years by helping us get Osama bin Laden, languishing in a Pakistani jail where several administrations have failed to do the obvious Siddiqui for Afridi trade that would lead to his liberation. When we focus on China, it's easy to pound the table and to say this is the enemy and we must confront them everywhere. The fact is it's a much more complicated relationship, although the politics of pounding the table may be very simple. I hope that we preserve the peace of the Taiwan Straits and preserve the status quo. I would point out that as far as visits to the United States from Taiwanese leaders, I had proposed earlier in the era of COVID, but it's still relevant now. We've had witnesses appear by video. And usually when we have a foreign government official, it's called a briefing rather than a hearing, although it looks pretty much the same. And I would like to see the foreign minister of Taiwan on a screen right here, and we don't need to ask the State Department for a visa. We get our own video equipment. I've got a question for Michael Schiffer. I head the rather small but still important Sind caucus. I want to commend you because you've invested almost $160 million in building 106 schools in Sind. But the situation that girls in Sind face is just horrific. About 3 girls every day face systematic abductions and forced conversions and marriage to men double, triple, quadruple their age. We look at Priya Kumari, who was abducted in 2021 at 9 years old, whose family still can't get the police to answer a simple question. So I would hope that you would consider building schools for girls, but particularly in the Baden district. So far, you have not built a school for girls there. Can I count on you to look at that?
I'll certainly talk about that with our mission director. Really appreciate you raising this important issue.
And then we look at our Korea policy, and it has our goal, first and foremost, is to limit their nuclear weapons program. It has been a manifest failure throughout this century for different administrations. But it hasn't been a political failure for those administrations, since no president has faced any political problem with the current policy, which is to pound the table, say North Korea will never have nuclear weapons, while every month they build another nuclear weapon. Worked out well for the politicians, not so well for the security of Los Angeles, which is now within range of those nuclear weapons. First, I have a bill with 42 co-sponsors, Daniel, to begin negotiations on ending the War of 1953. This would be not a concession to North Korea any more than Eisenhower made a concession to North Korea in 1953, but just to end the formal state of hostilities. Can you think of a reason why we wouldn't announce that we're open to that? Obviously, if the North Koreans don't pick up, it at least shows that we are dedicated to peace.
I guess what I would say, Congressman, is we'd, of course, if we had regular dialogue channels with counterparts in Pyongyang, if we could make progress on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, I think everything should be on the table.
Obviously, yeah, but this could be a confidence-building measure. We can obviously talk to the North Koreans at the UN and many other places, but my hope is that we would be looking at a highly limited number of highly monitored nuclear weapons as a possible outcome, because the current system of saying they'll never have a nuclear weapon means they get another one every month. And there are many parts of Los Angeles, all of which are within the reach. And the recent visit by Putin to North Korea and improvements in their missile capacity, and God forbid, improvements in their ability to have thermonuclear weapons, indicates that we can't just do another 25 years of saying they'll never have nuclear weapons and sanctioning them and then pretending they don't have nuclear weapons. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As chair of this committee, I would like to respond to your earlier comments before you started asking questions about 2 points that you raised. You talked about asking Assistant Secretary Liu to come before our committee, but I would like to point out that Assistant Secretary Liu is South Central America, and I believe we're going to have a separate budget hearing with our Middle East Subcommittee in July. So he will be there. And the second point you mentioned was when I was talking about Taiwanese high-level officials to come to the United States, to Washington, D.C., I was referring to them to visit us at their high level, not to appear before our committee as witnesses. So
I realize you want far more. I was proposing a baby step in your direction. Yeah. If you can achieve all you're trying to achieve, mazel tov.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, let me now recognize Andy Kim for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Kritenbrink, when we've chatted before, you've talked about, we've talked about the importance of coalition building, right? And saying that that's vitally important. Is that still something that you believe in terms of the work that we're doing in the Indo-Pacific?
Vitally important, and sir, respectfully, it might be the place where we've made the greatest progress in our Indo-Pacific strategy.
And we talk a lot about, and of course the framing of this is about great power competition. I'm also on the Select Committee on U.S.-China strategic competition. We do a lot on the military side, but I have to say, I'm concerned about our investments, as the ranking member pointed out, just major differences that we're seeing in terms of the budgets and what House Republicans are pushing forward now on development assistance account. right now standing at $108 million, down from the requested $544 million. The Economic Support Fund at $4 million instead of the $204 million that was requested. Can you give me a little bit of better sense, the two of you? What specifically would we see from those types of cuts?
Congressman, I worry, I like the ranking member's comment earlier when he worried that these cuts would be devastating. We worry about that as well. Could be devastating to our ability to stand up to China, devastating to our ability to continue to offer alternatives to our partners. And I think what's especially important, Representative Kim, is we have to be able to deliver tangible benefits and alternatives in infrastructure investments, in connectivity, things that deliver practical benefits. And I'm worried that cuts to our foreign assistance programs would be devastating to those priorities, and also cuts to the diplomatic engagement funding would cause us potentially to have to reduce our staffing and presence in the region at the time we should be stepping it up.
And that would be reducing it at a time when, as far as I know, we're seeing China increasing their diplomatic presence all across the world. Is that right? I believe that they have now surpassed our nation as having the largest number of diplomatic posts around the world. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Mr. Schiffer, you have some thoughts on your end?
Sure, if I can echo what Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink offered and read from the Statement of Administration Policy that was just issued on June 24th on the Department of State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriations Act. If this were to go into law, it would, quote, hinder the ability to successfully implement programs in the Indo-Pacific region, erode the U.S. diplomatic presence around the globe, and cede diplomatic and development ground to the People's Republic of China and other malign actors. I would offer for USAID, at a time when we just last year, with Administrator Powers' trip, reopened our Pacific mission in Suva, in Fiji, and established our country representative office in PNG, and are looking to go from having no permanent staff on the ground to 50 people by the end of FY25 in a region where relationships are critical. If this were to go into law, it would be absolutely deleterious. It would be deadly to our efforts to expand our presence and to deliver on the sorts of foreign assistance that Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink.
No, I appreciate it. And then look, what I've been trying to engage here is about widening the lens of what tools that we have at our disposal, recognizing we need a comprehensive approach if we're to deal with the level of strategic competition that we face right now, not just thinking about it in terms of military-related tools, but understanding the benefits that come. And, I want to just ask you about something that I consider to be perhaps one of the greatest accomplishments diplomatically so far that this administration has achieved, and something that has enormous impacts in terms of its ability to strengthen the United States' position with regards to strategic competition with China. It's about the U.S., Japan, and South Korea trilateral. So I'd love for you to give us a more tangible sense as we're approaching the 1 year since Camp David. Where do you see that standing? And do you see that as something that is very tangible and something that gives us the kind of benefit that comes diplomatically?
Perhaps I could respond first. I think that the rapprochement that's occurred between Seoul and Tokyo and how that's enabled this unprecedented trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington directly redounds to American national interests and our values. And what's most gratifying to me, for example, we launched an Indo-Pacific dialogue trilaterally with our three partners at my level, and our sole focus is how can our three countries work together to deliver these tangible benefits to the Indo-Pacific region. We focus specifically on Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and this is the kind of work that's so vitally important. A coalition like that, three global powers who share the same interests and values, working to better our region, working to support and defend the rules-based order. I think that's what will ensure that we prevail in the competition and maintain our interests and values.
Rep. Kim's time's up. Let me now recognize Representative Radiwagan for 5 minutes.
Talo Falaban, good afternoon. I want to thank Chairwoman Kim and Ranking Member Bera for holding this hearing, and I want to thank the both of you for attending. As you all are aware, I'm represent American Samoa in the Pacific, and I'm greatly concerned about the growing presence of PRC in the Pacific Islands region. Recently, there have been discussions between the independent state of Samoa and PRC about opening a fishing port and cannery in independent Samoa. That'll pose a direct threat to American Samoa's fishing industry, all while this administration seeks to close off large swaths of the Pacific to American fishermen, also threatening American Samoa's only industry. And some say that the Chinese are actually fishing in the U.S. EEZs. That's an interesting concept. But I would like to enter into the record an article about independent Samoa's Minister for Agriculture and Fisheries' recent visit to China. What is this administration doing to counter PRC investments in the Pacific and protecting American industry in the Pacific Islands region? Both of you can answer, please.
Representative Radewagen, nice to see you again. Thank you for your comment. What I would say, ma'am, is first we recognize how vitally important the Pacific Islands region is to our national interest. And then we talk about meeting our Pacific Island friends where they live, so to speak. In the two summits that President Biden hosted at the White House for Pacific Island leaders, the first time that we've done so, we focused on the Pacific Island Forum's 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific document. We looked at their priorities, countering the impacts of climate change, countering the negative impacts of illegal fishing, ensuring there's appropriate investment and development. And we made their priorities our priorities so that we can help them, because we believe that when our partners succeed, we succeed. We believe when we give countries alternatives, including alternatives to the PRC, we all benefit. So that's the primary focus of our efforts. I'd say our second major focus, ma'am, is to be present. We've opened 2 new embassies in the last year in the Solomon Islands and in Tonga. We will open imminently in the coming weeks in Vanuatu, and we are working to open in Kiribati. So between providing our partners alternatives in the areas I've outlined and being present, we believe that's our most effective way forward, and that is our strategy. Michael?
Building on what my colleague, Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink, offered, we have also looked, as we've already discussed, to expand our presence in the Pacific so that we can build those relationships that, as you know, Representative, are so critical for the region, and start with the mantra of listen, partner, and deliver. We want to be responsive to the needs of the local communities and the Pacific Island nations as they look to drive their own ambitions and meet their own aspirations. We have worked, as I mentioned, with Taiwan to provide local grants for livelihoods and resilience. Through our Climate Ready initiative, we took $24 million and mobilized over $500 million for climate resilience efforts in the Pacific, which is a pretty good return for the American taxpayer. We have undertaken work with Australia as well as Japan and Korea to look at how to strengthen governance institutions across the Pacific Islands. But really, and to underscore the point that Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink made earlier, we start by listening, and then we deliver on the needs that our Pacific Island friends put before us.
Thank you. I see I'm running out of time here, and this might have been mentioned earlier before I got here. But as a follow-up, the Pacific Islands are in dire need of undersea cables funded by the U.S. to guard against data risks from the PRC. Mr. Schiffer, can you explain what work USAID is doing to provide technical assistance to boost Pacific Island government's capacity and digital connectivity, especially undersea cables?
Certainly. As we discussed earlier, we worked with the Department of State, with our allies, Japan and Australia, to provide both a Palau cable and the East Micronesia cable, which we believe will provide safe, secure, and reliable internet access and digital communications for more than 100,000 people in the Pacific. And we recently also launched a digital connectivity partnership with the University of the South Pacific to address precisely the challenges that you have raised.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I have a couple of other questions. I'll submit them for the record. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
I now recognize Rep. Castro for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink, as you know, last year the House passed the Partner with ASEAN Act. When you testified here last year, you recognized the importance of enacting this legislation. The legislation was reported out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee last year, but has not been voted on by the whole Senate. And so what would the extension of diplomatic privileges and immunities to ASEAN mean for our relationship with the organization? And will you work with me to get this bill enacted before the ASEAN summit set for October?
Representative Castro, we remain very supportive of the spirit and the initiatives that are contained in the Act. We are true believers in the importance of ASEAN and other regional institutions. Represents ASEAN and its 10 member countries, as you know, represent the world's fastest growing, most dynamic, one of the youngest areas in the world. 650 million people together. Our 1 billion people, I think, have a bright future ahead, but we have to engage with the countries, the individual countries, and we believe with ASEAN itself. And as you said, providing, we think, those diplomatic privileges to ASEAN representatives, just as our ambassador to ASEAN is afforded those privileges in Jakarta, I think would really facilitate our work together in one of the most important regions in the world.
No, well, thank you so much, and thank you for all your work in building a relationship between the United States and the nations of ASEAN. One more question, and then I'm ranking member on Western Hemisphere, so I've got to go to our committee meeting there. Last week, a Philippine Navy ship was confronted by the Chinese Coast Guard while attempting to resupply the Sierra Madre. This attack follows a new Chinese law that authorizes their Coast Guard to seize foreign ships operating in the waters they claim for themselves. In recent weeks, many sailors of the Philippine Navy have been injured in such confrontations. On Tuesday, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said that Deputy Secretary Campbell reaffirmed with Philippine counterparts that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty, quote, extends to armed attacks on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft, including those of its Coast Guard, anywhere in the South China Sea. I understand that President Marcos has chosen not to invoke the treaty at this time. Can you provide us more detail on the U.S. commitments under the U.S.-Philippines Treaty, particularly in the context of the escalating conflict at Mischief Reef?
Yes, sir. Representative Castro, again, we are deeply concerned by China's aggressive and illegal, escalatory, irresponsible actions in the South China Sea. We have condemned them. We've also stated repeatedly that we stand with our Filipino allies. Our Filipino allies, as sovereign partners and allies of the United States, remain in the lead in their operations around Second Thomas Shoal, but we continue to reassure them and to make clear to the entire region and the world that our commitments under the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty are ironclad.
And so have we iterated to China our commitments to the Philippines under this treaty?
Multiple times, sir.
Thank you. I yield back here.
Thank you. We'll now go for a second round of
Yes, ma'am.
questioning, and I now recognize myself for a few minutes. I want to turn our shift to talking about the increased new defense relationship that is building between Russia and North Korea. Putin and Kim Jong-un recently met, and Russia has already been helping North Korea evade UN sanctions monitoring over its nuclear weapons program. So I'm concerned that their new mutual defense pact will further empower the North Korean regime to ramp up provocations in its nuclear weapons program. Last February, I believe, I sent a letter to Secretary Blinken requesting a briefing from the State Department on the developments in the Russia-North Korea relationship, but I have not heard back. And since then, you know, North Korea provided more weapons, and Russia continues to use it in its continued attack on Ukraine. So as cooperation between Russia and North Korea grows, obviously we are concerned, but how concerned are you about the Korean Peninsula's security and stability?
Madam Chairwoman, deeply concerned. We thought that President Putin's visit was just the latest manifestation of this deeply disturbing and growing partnership. And as you noted, we are concerned about the implications both in Europe And in the Indo-Pacific, the DPRK is providing large amounts of weapons which are being used on the battlefield in Ukraine by Russia to kill innocent Ukrainian civilians. And then
So will
conversely,
that change the developments and impact the future U.S. Policy on North Korea? I know my colleague, Representative Sherman, also mentioned some, like the conversation about his resolution or bill that he's talking about, starting a conversation about peaceful, peace on the Korean Peninsula. Is it a good timing to talk about it right now, especially as we see the growing aggression from
well,
North Korea?
ma'am, we'll never take off the table the fact that the door to dialogue and a better path remains open. But in the current circumstances, I think we have no choice but to double down on our deterrent capabilities. We have to continue to strengthen our bilateral alliances with both the ROK and Japan, increase the trilateral work that's going on, including in the security realm. And then we have to work not just trilaterally, but with the broader international community to increase the sanctions we've already imposed on those who are fueling the Russia DPRK trade. And I think, ma'am, we also have to increase our own deterrent capabilities, again, both the United States and together with our partners, so that we deter North Korea and its growing partnership with Russia. I think we have no choice. But I would say, ma'am, we do continue to reiterate the door to dialogue remains open. Unfortunately, the only answer we've ever gotten from Pyongyang is in the form of missile launches and other provocative actions.
North Korea and Kim Jong-un has repeatedly convinced us that we can't trust him, and he's not interested in a peaceful dialogue. So I really think that unilaterally trying to say there is no conflict on the Korean Peninsula or peace on the Korean Peninsula at this point is really premature. So I just wanted to reiterate that, and thank you. I think we share the same concerns there.
Yes, ma'am.
With that, I'm going to turn to Ranking Member Bera for your additional questions.
Great, thank you. Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink, I know we were chatting briefly before this hearing, and I know yesterday I was questioned by a reporter on this new law that has come out of Beijing, the judicial measure aimed at penalizing individuals who advocate for Taiwanese independence up to the death penalty, in fact. And I know the State Department's come out and condemned this.
Yes, sir.
But it's that escalatory rhetoric, those type of actions that are coming out of Beijing that really are very troublesome and really are changing what we would like to see, which is really the status quo that's been peaceful, prosperous, and stable for the region. I wanted to give you an opportunity just to comment on these types of laws and the chilling effect
Thank
that they
you,
can have.
Mr. Ranking Member. We're deeply concerned that China would take these escalatory, destabilizing steps now and essentially work on the extraterritorial application of PRC law and regulation in ways that are deeply disturbing and will, we fear, have a chilling effect, certainly on cross-strait dialogue and interaction. You may have noticed today that the authorities in Taiwan issued a warning to their public to be cognizant of these dangers before considering travel to the PRC. So we believe that China ought to contribute to cross-strait peace and stability rather than undermine it. We're deeply concerned, and if passed as prologue, we're concerned that China could apply these regulations to others overseas as well.
Great. I'll certainly talk to my Taiwan caucus co-chairs, and I think we ought to put out a strong statement condemning this type of policy as well.
I think Mr. Rankin clearly designed to intimidate people from speaking their minds and speaking candidly about the situation across the strait.
Right.
Deeply unfortunate.
I won't ask you to comment on this unless you want to, but in my recent travels, both to Tonga and the Solomons, one thing that did come up was having consular services. There are certain, specifically in Tonga, since we do have a large Tongan American population as well, currently they have to travel to Suva to get those services, and I think that is an undue burden, and that's something that certainly would love to work on you.
We would love to work with you on that, Mr. Ranking Member. I would say we've, of course, heard that directly from our Tongan friends and others as well. We're doing everything we can to facilitate consular services because it's so important to our relationship and our interactions and our trade and people-to-people ties. We've done some innovative things to try to make it easier and to bring people to Tonga on occasion to provide those services as well. I think the long-term goal is to try to be able to offer those services in a more sustained, regular way. But in the interest of getting up and running, we focused on a smaller footprint. But that certainly is our long-term goal, sir. We'd love to work with you.
Look forward to working with. And then just in the few minutes I have left, Mr. Schiffer, we talked briefly about the Pacific Island tuna project at Marshall Islands. I think it's pretty elegant in design. It seems like the Marshallese really appreciate it. It adds value. It also has the ability to impact sustainable fishing as well. If you want to take a minute or so just to expand on this, and we would love to work with you as well as others to think about how we scale this up, particularly when I was in P&G, that was an issue that we talked a lot about.
Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to add a little bit more color. I think from our perspective, and this speaks precisely to the power of our development model as opposed to that of the PRC. There's not an economic logic for the fishing dock by itself. There's not a logic for to support the maritime conservation work that is so important for the Blue Pacific, and that the Nature Conservancy has an interest in in and of itself. But by knitting together both the private sector and the public sector interests, of bringing Walmart that has important interests in bringing tuna to American households at prices that we can all afford, and the Nature Conservancy that has an interest in maritime conservation and sustainable fisheries, and then bringing USAID providing technical assistance and helping with the design work, and then our colleagues at the Development Finance Corporation who were able to help de-risk the financing. We were able to come together and offer that public-private partnership in line with the aspirations of the Marshall Islands themselves to create this dock.
Well, I look forward to working with you and others to scale that up across the islands.
Likewise.
Thank you. I now recognize Rep. Barr for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Kritenbrink, I want to get to the Philippines and the South China Sea in a minute, but I just want to drill down a little bit more on the questions that I was asking before in my first round. And Representative Andy Kim was making the point that we need more robust budgeting. I would submit respectfully that no amount of budget increases can fix diplomatic foot faults. When we're pursuing sanctions relief, the funding issues don't resolve that. So I'm concerned about a position of appeasement and chasing upfront sanctions relief in exchange for illusory promises from the PRC that never materialize. But back to Taiwan, that was just an editorial comment. Back to Taiwan, I was asking you at the end of my last round of questioning about the administration's neglect of Taiwan's forced modernization needs, and that in 2022, the Biden administration discouraged Taiwan from acquiring early warning aircraft and anti-submarine warfare helicopters. Is it your position that you did not discourage Taiwan from acquiring those capabilities?
Congressman, I don't know if I know the exact weapon system that you're talking about, but what I could say is our policy is one of doing everything possible to grow Taiwan's deterrent capacity. We have had conversation with Taiwan friends about the best way to do that, and the agreement that we've reached is that asymmetric means are the best way to do so. I'm happy to take back the specific question on those weapon systems, but we have had conversations about are certain weapon system asymmetric? Are they in fact something that would not survive the first hours of any?
That's fair. That's fair, and
right.
I agree with the emphasis on asymmetric.
But I would have to take that back. But I would just absolutely say, Congressman, we are doing everything possible, and I would say taking an unprecedented range of steps to build Taiwan's deterrent capacity in every way possible.
Well, and you give credit where credit's due. You have noticed FMS cases for Taiwan, but I just would note for the record, and that was your response to me in the earlier round of questioning, but I would note for the record the total value of the FMS notified by the Biden administration is a third of those notified by the previous administration. So the more, the better, in my view. Let's make Taiwan that porcupine. We don't want war. We want to deter war, but the way to deter war and the way to deter a blockade and the way to deter a cross-strait invasion that she says the PLA has to be ready for in 2027 is delivery, not just promises of asymmetrical capabilities, but deliveries of these weapon systems.
Sir, could I make just one comment? Sure. I would say I don't think comparing dollar figures is always the best comparison because we've notified at least 22 sales, which is an unprecedented number. And because the focus is on asymmetric means, oftentimes they are not as high a dollar value system. So that would be our difference on that. But look,
well,
in
just
general,
keep it up. Keep it up.
And we also recognize, we discussed last time, there are some delays based on U.S. defense industrial base challenges. We're working to overcome those. But we understand and are in daily communication with our Taiwan friends, again, about the most rapid way possible building their deterrent capacity.
Thank you for that. Philippines, real quickly. I was in a Poseidon naval aircraft over the second Thomas Shoal. We saw with our own eyes in August what's going on down there. Of course, what happened last week with the maritime militia injuring the Filipino Navy personnel is very concerning, as you pointed out.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything preventing the U.S. Coast Guard from escorting Philippine Coast Guard vessels during resupply of the second Thomas Shoal?
What I would say, Congressman, is we are in very close daily, hourly contact with our Filipino allies. It's very clear to us they see this as their sovereign issue. They are in the lead, and as their ally, we are strongly supporting them, but they are in the lead.
Let me give the administration a compliment on EDCA, and you've got a very capable ambassador, Ambassador Carlson, there. She's doing a great job. These EDCA sites, Mr. Schiffer, what role can USAID play in supporting these additional EDCA sites that the administration has secured with Marcos? I think those are very important, but we need to build those up.
We fully agree with you, and in that 3D concept of defense, diplomacy, and development working hand in glove, we have had numerous conversations over the past several years with our Department of Defense colleagues, Department of State, and our Filipino allies on what we can do to help provide the development needs that the Philippines is asking for that undergirds the logic of the alliance. I visited 2 EDCA sites myself in the past 2 years to talk with local communities around the EDCA sites, including just 2 weeks ago, the last time I was in the Philippines, so that we can make sure that we're working hand in glove with Manila on what they need to be able to assure the presence and posture that the United States needs across diplomatic development and defense needs.
Well, my time has expired, but we need to be back in Subic as well. I yield.
I now recognize Representative Radiwagan for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Mr. Schiffer. I want to talk a little bit about disaster relief. Can you go into the role that USAID is playing in responding to, and this may have been mentioned earlier when I was not here, to Papua New Guinea's deadly landslide, but more specifically, what is USAID doing to promote climate resilience and sustainable development in the Pacific Islands?
Thank you. We have not yet had an opportunity to address this important question, so my thanks for raising it. USAID, as you know, is the lead for the U.S. government for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. When those deadly landslides struck in Papua New Guinea, our team, our disaster response team in PNG, immediately engaged with both local authorities and the national government in Port Moresby, coordinated with the State Department and with Indo-Pacific Command, which has unique capabilities that are often critical for being able to respond to these disasters, and provided support to PNG as they did their initial assessments and look to undertake rescue operations. That is the sort of thing that we do, unfortunately, every day of the year, because it is needed every day of the year, and not just in the Pacific, but worldwide. We are also working, and I think you put your finger on a really important question, to strengthen the local capacity of our Pacific partners and our other partners across the Indo-Pacific, so that they themselves have the wherewithal to be able to respond when there are humanitarian assistance and disaster response needs. We have provided over $100 million in the past. I want to say 6 or 7 years, but I will get back to correct the record on that. In HADR support in the Pacific, including to build resilience to the increasing challenges that the region has that are driven by climate change, whether it's rising sea levels, increasingly intense storms, unequal and uneven weather patterns that endanger agriculture. All of these are areas where USAID is looking to work with our Pacific partners, responsive to their needs, to be able to provide greater resilience.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I want to thank both of our witnesses for your valuable testimony and the members for your questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond those in writing. And I'd like to give myself a couple minutes to make a closing statement. The subcommittee on the Indo-Pacific has a crucial task ahead of us, improving the U.S.'s engagement and presence in the Indo-Pacific to support our allies and counter malign influence from the Chinese Communist Party. And the subcommittee also has a crucial task of convincing the American people that the Indo-Pacific matters. And this region creates jobs for our exporters and makes the chips that power our economy. So it is critical to the American prosperity. It's also a region in which our commitments and interests may be put to the test. I've seen firsthand the lengths to which PLA is testing our mutual defense treaty commitments to the Philippines, as was mentioned a few times already. And I've seen the PLA inching their ships closer to Taiwan's territorial waters. And polls suggest that Americans are increasingly concerned about China. And it's our responsibility as elected representatives of the American people to articulate to our constituents the threats we face, the sacrifices we may need to make, and what we must do to prevent those threats from fully materializing. So U.S. foreign policy decisions in the Pacific region will be pivotal in determining America's future and our standing on the world stage. Therefore, I urge my colleagues in Congress and State Department to continue working to ensure that we prioritize funding for the department's Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. And we need to present ourselves as a trusted and reliable partner to our friends and allies in the region, because our success in the strategic competition depends on it. And on that note, I would like to encourage you, Assistant Secretary Kritenbrink, to plan your trip to Taiwan, hopefully soon. Again, our legislation that is already signed into law allows you to do it. And as a reminder, I think it was after the legislation was signed into law, previous Undersecretary Keith Kroc visited Taiwan in 2020. So you, as the new high-ranking official, I think it's up to you to visit our friend in Taiwan and to show that we really mean business. So we are actually showing up. We're going to deliver. We started delivering the arms that they asked for and they paid for. We need to make sure that we fulfill our commitment before anything happens in 2027 or before. So thank you so much. And I'd like to recognize Mr. Berra for any closing remarks you may have.
No, other than, again, appreciate the witnesses. This is always an important hearing. And really the issue in our presence in East Asia and throughout the Indo-Pacific is not a partisan issue, I think. Again, but I will just once again emphasize that we've got to adequately resource not just defense, which gets plenty of resources, but again, the three-legged stool of our foreign policy also involves development and diplomacy, and sometimes I feel like the stool's a little bit out of balance. So we've got to make sure we adequately resource USAID and State Department if we want to win this battle in the 21st century. So again, thank you and everyone that works for you, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. So without objection, the committee now stands adjourned.